The mist clung to the jagged peaks of the Forbidden Reach like a shroud, but Lucian Darkwood didn't need sight to hunt. He felt the disturbance in the air before the scream came, a sound that carried betrayal so pure it made the Alpha King's blood hum with recognition. 300 feet above, a white-cloaked figure plummeted through the storm clouds, arms outstretched not in panic, but in surrender. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy the story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The impact shattered the black surface of the Abyss River like bone through ice. Lucian was already moving. When he dragged Aveline Cross from the freezing depths, her lips blue and her pulse threading dangerously thin, something ancient and violent ignited between them, the obsidian bond, a legend whispered only in the oldest blood rites. The resonance staggered him, a frequency that shouldn't exist in a wolf who couldn't shift. As he carried her broken body toward the shore, Lucian's crimson eyes caught the glint of something impossible, silver, crystallized in her veins like frost in a dying tree. This wasn't weakness. This was sabotage. He lowered his mouth to her ear, his voice a dark promise wrapped in curiosity. "Wake up, little wolf. I want to see what you do when you realize they tried to bury a goddess." This follows the competitor's narrative beats, the scream, the fall, the rescue, the resonance/bond discovery, the revelation of poisoning, the Alpha King's foreboding final line, while maintaining your story's unique atmosphere and mythology. Chapter 1. The Glass Engagement. The wind at the summit of the Forbidden Reach didn't howl, it whispered. Aveline Cross had always thought that was worse. Howls you could brace against, but whispers crept under your skin and stayed there, cold and patient. "You're shaking," Silas said behind her, his voice carrying that particular blend of concern and condescension he'd perfected over the years. "Are you cold?" Aveline pulled her white cloak tighter, though it wasn't the altitude that made her tremble. It was the way he stood too close to the edge, the way his hand rested on her lower back with just slightly too much pressure. The way Celine, her half-sister, her supposed confidant, watched from 20 paces back with eyes that glittered like cut glass. "I'm fine," Aveline managed. Her voice sounded thin up here, like the air itself was trying to erase her. Silas smiled, and for a moment he looked like the man she'd agreed to bind herself to. Strong jaw, honey-colored eyes, the kind of alpha presence that made weaker wolves bow their heads instinctively. But there was something new in his expression tonight, something that made her wolf, the one that had never come, the one that had marked her as broken since her 16th birthday, recoil in her chest. "You've always been fine, haven't you?" He turned to face the chasm, gesturing at the darkness below where the Abyss River churned 300 feet down. "Fine with being the Omega daughter. Fine with never shifting. Fine with being paraded around as my charitable choice of mate." The words hit like physical blows. "Silas. She knows." Celine's voice cut through the mist as she approached, one hand resting on the barely visible swell of her stomach. "Don't you, sister? You've always known you weren't enough." Aveline's world tilted, and it had nothing to do with the cliff's edge. She looked between them, Silas's hand now openly resting on Celine's hip, Celine's triumphant smirk, the matching satisfaction in both their faces, and understood with brutal clarity that she'd been a fool. "The engagement was always political," Silas said, almost gently. "Your father needed the alliance. I needed the legitimacy of the Cross name. But I can't have a Luna who can't even shift. The pack would revolt." He paused, tilting his head. "They already are." "So, you'll what? Break the bond?" Aveline's voice cracked. Humiliate me in front of the council? Celine laughed, the sound bright and cruel. We can't have you telling stories, Ava. You understand. She didn't understand. Not until Silas moved, his hand shooting out to grip her shoulder. Not until the world spun and her feet left solid ground. Not until she was falling, the scream tearing from her throat carrying every ounce of betrayal, rage, and despair she'd swallowed for 21 years. The last thing she saw before the mist swallowed her was Celine's hand raised in a mocking wave. Then there was only wind and darkness, and the terrible certainty that she was about to die having never been anything at all. Chapter 2. The King of Shadows. Aveline woke to agony and the smell of smoke. Her body was a symphony of wrong, ribs grinding with each breath, her left arm bent at an angle that made her stomach lurch, and a coldness so deep it felt like her bones had turned to ice. She tried to move and whimpered, the sound pathetic even to her own ears. Don't. The voice was dark velvet wrapped around steel, and it came from everywhere and nowhere at once. She forced her eyes open. The world swam in shades of crimson and shadow. She was in a room carved from black stone, lit by braziers that burned with flames the color of old blood. And standing at the foot of what appeared to be an altar, no, a bed, was a man who made every alpha she'd ever known look like children playing dress-up. Lucian Darkwood was taller than Silas, broader through the shoulders, with black hair that fell past his collar and eyes that glowed like dying embers. Scars traced his exposed forearms in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost ritual. He wore darkness like other men wore authority, and when he moved closer, Aveline's broken body tried instinctively to recoil. You fell 300 feet into the abyss, he said, studying her with an intensity that felt invasive. Your heart stopped twice on the way here. You should be dead. I'm not. The words scraped out of her throat. Disappointingly, no. But there was something in his expression that contradicted the casual cruelty, a hunger that made her skin prickle with awareness despite the pain. Though I'm beginning to think that's the most interesting thing about you. He reached out and she flinched. His hand stopped midair, one eyebrow rising in what might have been amusement. Then he pressed 2 fingers to her wrist, and the world exploded. The sensation was indescribable, like lightning and recognition and something ancient all colliding in her chest. The obsidian bond, her mind supplied, though she'd thought it was just a myth the old wolves told. 2 souls forged in darkness, bound by shadow and blood. Lucian's eyes flared wide, genuine shock cracking his controlled facade. Impossible, he breathed. What? Aveline gasped, but he was already pulling back, his expression shuddering. She was back in the chamber with the crimson braziers, but everything looked sharper now, colors more vivid, shadows deeper. She could hear the flutter of bat wings 3 floors above, smell the iron in the stone itself, and beneath it all, a thrumming awareness of something vast coiled inside her chest, waiting. There you are. Lucian sat in a chair by the door, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Probably hadn't. How do you feel? Aveline took inventory. No pain. No cold. Her previously broken bones were whole, healed by the accelerated metabolism that came with purging the suppressant. And inside, where there had always been a hollow ache of emptiness. Full, she whispered. I feel full. His smile was knowing. Your wolf is awake. She's been waiting a long time. He stood, moving to open the double doors that led to what looked like a training yard carved into the mountain itself. Let's see what she wants to say. The night air hit her like a drug. Aveline walked out onto black sand, barefoot, and trembling not with fear but with anticipation. Above, the blood moon hung swollen and red, and she understood with sudden clarity why Lucian had waited. This was a night of power, when the veil between what was and what could be grew thin. "Don't fight her," Lucian said from behind. "Let her rise." Aveline closed her eyes and reached for the presence she'd felt inside. It surged forward like a wave, and the shift that had been denied her for 21 years finally came. But it was nothing like what she'd been taught to expect. There was no fur, no four-legged form, no howl of triumph. Instead, shadows erupted from her skin like smoke-given form, wrapping around her body until she couldn't tell where she ended and the darkness began. The sensation of her spine elongating was strange, but not painful, and then the wings unfurled. Massive, obsidian, tangible shadow that caught the moonlight and devoured it. Aveline looked down at her hands, still humanoid but clawed now, darkness rippling beneath translucent skin like living ink. Her reflection in the polished obsidian walls showed eyes that glowed the same crimson as Lucian's flames, and a form that was half woman, half nightmare, entirely lethal. Holy gods! Someone breathed from the ramparts above. She could hear them clearly now, a dozen warriors who'd gathered to watch, their heartbeats suddenly racing with primal fear. Lucian circled her slowly, his expression unreadable. "Not a wolf of fur," he murmured. "A wolf of smoke and wings." The last Shadow Walker queen had the same form. They called her the Devourer of Light. Aveline flexed her wings experimentally. They responded like extensions of thought, shadow made solid through sheer will. When she spread them fully, they blotted out the blood moon, casting the entire courtyard into absolute darkness.
And she laughed.
It started low and built until it echoed off the mountains, a sound of pure, unleashed freedom. 21 years of silence, of swallowed rage, of being told she was empty. It all poured out in that sound. When she finally stopped, she found Lucian watching her with something close to satisfaction. "Now," he said softly, "shall we discuss what you're going to do to the people who tried to bury you?" Aveline's wings folded against her back, like a cloak of living night. Her smile was all teeth. "I'm going to remind them why Shadow Walkers were feared."
"Good."
Lucian's eyes blazed crimson. "Because in 3 days, Silas is hosting a gala at Obsidian Ridge to celebrate his engagement to your sister. And I think it's time the Omega made an appearance." Chapter 5. The Ghost in the Ballroom. The Obsidian Ridge estate blazed with light against the autumn darkness, every window glowing like a challenge to the night itself. Aveline stood at the forest edge, dressed in midnight silk that Lucian's people had procured, a gown that looked like captured starlight, high-necked and elegant, designed to make her unrecognizable as the broken girl who'd worn simple homespun and kept her eyes down. "You don't have to do this yet," Lucian said beside her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We could wait. Train longer. Plan better."
"No."
Aveline's fingers traced the silver mask that covered the upper half of her face, ornate, expensive, the kind worn by visiting dignitaries who wished to maintain mystery. "I need to see them. Need to watch them celebrate my death before I decide exactly how they'll pay for it." She could feel her wolf thrumming beneath her skin, eager and violent. In the 3 days since her first shift, she'd learned to hold the form just beneath the surface, ready to be called forth in an instant. The power sang in her veins like a promise. The Shadow Realm emissary and her escort, Lucian reminded her, offering his arm. He was devastating in formal black, every inch the dangerous Alpha King, but wearing it like a costume for this particular hunt. "You're here to discuss trade agreements. Nothing more." Aveline took his arm, feeling the obsidian bond pulse at the contact, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in this, even if she felt terrifyingly exposed. "And if I see Silas?" If he touches her the way he used to touch me, then you smile and file it away with everything else you're going to make him answer for. His hand covered hers, grounding. Patience, little wolf. The best revenge is calculated. They approached the entrance where servants checked invitations against a master list. The man at the door barely glanced at the forged documents Lucian presented before bowing low. Welcome, Lord Darkwood. The Alpha will be pleased you've graced us with your presence. The entry hall was exactly as Aveline remembered, all white marble and gold fixtures, designed to proclaim wealth and power. But now she could see the cracks in the facade, the places where the gilding had worn thin. Everything about Obsidian Ridge that had once seemed grand now looked desperate, a pack trying too hard to appear stronger than it was. Aveline used to live here, she murmured to Lucian, maintaining the pretense of polite small talk as they entered the ballroom. Before they killed her, I mean. His hand tightened fractionally on hers. Did she? The ballroom stole what remained of her breath. Hundreds of wolves from a dozen packs filled the space, all dressed in their finest, all celebrating. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across the crowd, and a quartet played something elegant and forgettable in the corner. And there, on the raised dais at the far end, Silas stood with his hand possessively on Celine's waist, both of them radiant in ivory and gold. Her sister wore Aveline's mother's sapphire necklace, the one that should have passed to the eldest daughter. The one Aveline had been told was lost. Breathe, Lucian commanded softly. She did, pulling air through clenched teeth. Her wolf wanted blood, wanted to shift right here, right now, and show them all what they'd tried to destroy. But she held it back, held herself together through sheer will. The deceased sister recovered quickly, Lucian observed, his tone conversational, but his eyes sharp. Grief affects everyone differently. Aveline matched his casual cruelty, playing the game. Perhaps she's celebrating her newfound freedom from a disappointing sibling. They circulated through the crowd, Lucian introducing her as Lady Moira Ashford, a representative from the Shadow Realm's southern territories. Aveline smiled behind her mask and made polite conversation, all while her enhanced senses catalogued everything. The whispered conversations about that Omega girl, such a tragedy. The barely concealed relief in her father's eyes when she glimpsed him across the room. The way Silas kept touching Celine's growing belly like it was a trophy. They're announcing the formal engagement, someone near them murmured as Alpha Garrett took the stage. Her father looked older than she remembered, or perhaps she was simply seeing him clearly for the first time. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his formal robes immaculate, but there was something hollow in his expression as he raised his glass. My friends, Garrett's voice carried across the ballroom. Tonight we celebrate not just an engagement, but the dawn of a new era for Obsidian Ridge. My daughter Celine and Alpha Silas will unite our packs, strengthening bloodlines and ensuring prosperity for generations. No mention of the other daughter, the broken one, the one he'd poisoned since childhood. And we also remember, Silas added smoothly, stepping forward with manufactured solemnity, the tragic loss we suffered just days ago. Aveline Cross, though she could not shift, will always be remembered for her gentle spirit. The crowd murmured condolences. Several wolves she'd known her entire life dabbed at dry eyes. Aveline's hand found Lucian's, her claws threatening to emerge. The bond between them flared hot, and she felt his power rise to meet hers, steadying her, containing her, promising her that this moment of humiliation would be answered. Steady, he breathed against her ear, and to anyone watching it would look like an intimate gesture between lovers. Let them have their lies tonight. In time, you'll feed them back every word. As the crowd raised glasses to toast the happy couple, Aveline caught Celine's gaze across the room. Her sister's eyes widened fractionally, some instinct recognizing threat even if she couldn't identify its source. Aveline smiled behind her mask, slow and predatory, and had the satisfaction of watching Celine's hand tremble as she lifted her champagne. Soon, little sister, she thought. Very soon, you'll remember why you should have made sure I was actually dead. Chapter 6. The Trial of the Hunt. The King's Games were held once every 5 years in the Shadow Realm, a brutal tradition designed to test warriors and settle disputes through sanctioned violence. Aveline had heard stories about them, whispered warnings from pack elders about the savagery of northern wolves, but standing in the obsidian arena as dawn broke over the mountains, she understood the stories hadn't done it justice. "You don't have to do this," Lucian said for the 3rd time that morning, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. Aveline adjusted the leather bracers on her forearms, testing the fit. "Yes, I do." After the gala, she'd spent 2 weeks training in increasingly desperate intensity, pushing her body and her wolf until Lucian's warriors started giving her wide berth in the corridors. The sight of Silas and Celine, triumphant and untouched, had lit something in her that simple revenge fantasies couldn't extinguish. She needed to prove, to herself, to the world, that she was no longer the Omega who'd been pushed aside. "The hunt is different from sparring," Kalen warned from where he stood checking her vitals one final time. "These warriors will be trying to kill you. Actually kill you."
Good.
Aveline's smile was all edges. "Then they'll understand what it feels like." The rules of the hunt were simple. 20 warriors entered the Blackwood Forest at dawn. Only 10 would emerge by dusk, marked by the silver bands they'd claimed from the others. It was considered a high honor to be chosen, and an even higher honor to survive. What made this year's hunt exceptional was Lucian's announcement 3 days prior that he was entering an unknown participant. A female. Rumors had spread like wildfire through the Shadow Realm and beyond. Several packs had sent representatives just to witness what they assumed would be a spectacular failure. Among those representatives were 3 wolves from Obsidian Ridge. Aveline spotted them in the crowd of spectators as she entered the arena: Dane, Marcus, and Thorn. The same warriors who'd escorted her to the Forbidden Reach that night, who'd stood watch while Silas led her to the cliff's edge. They didn't recognize her now, with her hair dyed raven black and her body transformed by weeks of Lucian's merciless training, but she recognized them. "I want them in the hunt," she told Lucian quietly. His expression remained neutral, but she felt his satisfaction through the bond. "Already arranged." They volunteered when they heard there was a woman competing. His smile was razor-sharp. Apparently, they found the idea amusing. The horn sounded, calling the competitors to the starting line. 19 warriors assembled, each one massive, scarred, lethal. And then there was Aveline, looking almost delicate among them despite the predatory grace she'd developed. Dane caught sight of her and laughed. "Is this a joke? Lucian sending a girl?" "This girl has a name," Aveline said softly, meeting his eyes. "But you won't need to remember it long." His laughter died as something in her gaze registered as wrong. The hunt master, a grizzled wolf with more scars than skin, raised his hand. "The rules are simple. Claim 5 silver bands or eliminate 5 competitors to win your place in the final 10. Killing is permitted. Mercy is not required." He looked directly at Aveline. "Any questions?" She shook her head, her wolf already surging beneath her skin. "Then let the hunt begin." The horn's second blast sent them into the forest. Aveline deliberately fell to the back of the pack, letting the others crash ahead through the undergrowth like the overconfident predators they were. She could hear them, every footstep, every breath, every whispered strategy. Her enhanced senses painted a complete picture of the battlefield. She gave them 30 minutes to spread out, to feel safe. Then she climbed. The trees in Blackwood Forest grew ancient and massive, their branches thick enough to support her weight easily. She moved through the canopy like shadow itself, her wings, not fully manifested but present enough to guide her, allowing her to leap distances that should have been impossible. Below, she heard Thorn call out to Marcus. "You see the girl yet?" "Probably hiding," Marcus replied. "Or already dead. You hear that scream earlier?" They laughed, the sound carrying easily through the forest. Aveline dropped from the branches directly behind Thorn. He spun, fast for his size, but not fast enough. She ducked his swing, drove her knee into his solar plexus, and when he doubled over gasping, she swept his legs and pinned him with her forearm across his throat. "Remember the Forbidden Reach?" she whispered against his ear. "Remember watching?" His eyes went wide with recognition, impossible recognition, and then she claimed his silver band with perhaps more violence than strictly necessary. Marcus charged from the left. She rolled, letting him crash into a tree trunk, then was on him before he could recover. 3 strikes, ribs, knee, temple, and he was down. Another band claimed. "What the hell are you?" Dane's voice came from somewhere in the trees. "I'm the girl you threw away," Aveline called back, her voice carrying through the forest with unnatural clarity. "I'm the Omega you laughed at. I'm the broken thing you thought you killed." She felt her wolf rising, shadows beginning to leak from her skin. "Come find out what I became." The Huntmaster would say later that he'd never seen anything like what happened in those woods. By noon, Aveline had claimed 7 silver bands, more than required, but she wasn't interested in requirements. She was interested in sending a message. When she emerged from the forest at dusk, blood on her hands and shadows clinging to her like a second skin, the crowd had gone silent. Behind her, Dane limped out barely conscious, both his arms broken, carried by medics. Marcus and Thorn were still in the forest, unconscious but alive. She'd made sure of that. She wanted them to remember. Wanted them to wake up knowing exactly who had beaten them. Lucian waited at the edge of the arena, his expression carefully neutral for the crowd but his eyes burning with approval. "Enjoying yourself?" "Immensely." Aveline dropped the extra silver bands at his feet, 9 in total. "When can we do it again?" His laugh was low and dangerous. "Patience. Your father is in the audience. He came specifically to see if the rumors about my mysterious warrior were true." Aveline's head snapped up, finding Alpha Garrett in the stands. Even from this distance, she could see the confusion on his face as he stared at her, something nagging at his recognition, but not quite connecting. "Does he know?" she asked quietly. "Not yet." Lucian moved closer, his voice for her alone. "But he will. And when he does, I want him to understand exactly what he tried to destroy." He offered his hand.
"Come.
"Let's show them what a shadow walker looks like when she's done pretending to be weak." Aveline took his hand, and together they walked back toward the citadel as the crowd erupted in stunned applause behind them, the sound of a world beginning to realize that something ancient and terrible had just woken up angry. Chapter 7. Shattered Legacy. The message arrived 3 days after the hunt, delivered by a trembling courier who looked like he'd aged a decade during his journey through the Shadow Realm. Aveline watched from the shadows as Lucian unfolded the parchment, his expression darkening with each line. "Your father requests an audience," he said without looking up. "He wants to discuss potential alliance opportunities with the Shadow Realm's new champion."
A pause.
"He's coming here. Tomorrow." Aveline's hands clenched on the stone railing of the balcony where she stood. Below, the citadel sprawled in layers of obsidian and shadow, beautiful in its brutality. She'd grown to love this place, its honesty, its refusal to pretend darkness was anything other than what it was. Does he know? Her voice was steadier than she felt. The letter suggests he suspects something. He's seen you fight. Heard your voice. Lucian joined her at the railing, his presence a steady anchor. But knowing and accepting are different things. Men like Garrett Cross don't easily admit they've made catastrophic mistakes. He didn't make a mistake. The words came out bitter. He made a choice. Every morning, he watched me struggle, watched me believe I was broken. And he chose that. For 21 years. Lucian was quiet for a moment. Do you want me there when you face him? She considered it. The temptation to have his strength beside her was powerful, but this confrontation needed to be hers alone.
No.
But stay close enough to hear me scream if he tries to push me off another cliff. His laugh was dark silk. Little wolf, if he tries anything, there won't be enough left of him for a funeral. The next evening, Alpha Garrett Cross arrived with an escort of 6 wolves, all wearing Obsidian Ridge's colors. Aveline watched from a hidden alcove as they were led through the Citadel's main halls, saw the way her father's eyes catalogued everything, the wealth, the power, the casual display of strength in every warrior they passed. He was here to negotiate from a position he thought was equal. She was going to enjoy correcting that assumption. They met in Lucian's private study, a room of dark wood and darker secrets, lit by the ever-present crimson flames. Lucian sat behind his desk with the easy authority of a man who'd never questioned his right to rule. Aveline stood by the window, still wearing the shadows like a cloak, her face partially obscured. Alpha Cross, Lucian greeted with cold courtesy. You've traveled far. Lord Darkwood. Garrett inclined his head, the gesture just shy of insulting in its brevity. I've come to discuss the warrior who won your hunt. There are rumors. There are always rumors. Lucian's tone could have frozen fire. Perhaps you should specify which ones interest you. Garrett's jaw tightened. Aveline recognized that look, the one he wore when someone challenged him and he couldn't immediately crush them. The warrior. The female. I wish to know her lineage.
Why?
Aveline spoke for the first time, not moving from the window. Planning to poison another daughter, or was once enough? The silence that followed was absolute. Garrett spun to face her fully, and she watched the exact moment recognition crashed into denial into horrified understanding. His face went through a spectrum of emotions too quickly to catalog, finally settling on something between rage and fear. That's impossible, he whispered. You're dead. You fell. 300 feet into the Abyss River? Aveline stepped into the light, letting him see her clearly for the first time. I did.
It was terrifying.
But not as terrifying as spending 21 years being slowly murdered by my own father. She moved closer and had the satisfaction of watching him retreat a step. Did you know the silver was crystallizing around my heart? Another year, and it would have killed me anyway. Silas just hurried the process along. I don't know what lies.
Don't.
The word cracked like lightning, and shadows exploded from her skin in response to her rage. Garrett stumbled backward as darkness filled the room, as wings unfurled from her shoulders and her eyes blazed crimson. Don't you dare lie to me.
Not now.
Not when we both know exactly what you did. Her father stared at her transformed state, and she saw the truth written across his face. He'd known. Of course he'd known. Had probably known from the moment she was born what she could become. You are too powerful, he said finally, the words hollow. Your mother's bloodline, the Shadow Walker gift, it would have made you alpha. Would have rendered me obsolete. His hands shook. I built Obsidian Ridge from nothing. I wasn't going to let some accident of birth take it from me. So you poisoned your own daughter. Aveline's voice had gone quiet, deadly. fed me silver from childhood, watched me believe I was broken. Let the entire pack mock me as Omega while you knew what I really was. I did what I had to do to protect my legacy. Your legacy? She laughed, and the sound held no humor. Your legacy is standing in front of you, Father. I am what you created. Every lie, every drop of poison, every moment you looked at me with disgust, you forged me into this. Her wings spread wider, blotting out the firelight. And now I'm going to dismantle everything you built, piece by piece, starting with the alliance that killed me. Garrett's hand dropped to his belt, where a silver blade hung. You can't. I wouldn't. Lucian's voice cut through the tension, soft but absolute. He hadn't moved from his desk, but power radiated from him like heat. You're in my territory, Alpha Cross. You touch her, and I'll consider it an act of war. She's my daughter. She's a Shadow Walker queen, Lucian corrected coldly. And under ancient law, that makes her my equal in authority. Probably my superior, if we're being technical. He finally stood, moving to Aveline's side. You should leave now, before she decides you're not worth letting live. For a long moment, Garrett just stared at them, at the daughter he'd tried to destroy, now wreathed in shadow and power, standing beside the most dangerous alpha in the territories. Then something crumbled in his expression, some last wall of denial finally breaking. I was afraid, he said quietly. Your mother, she was magnificent.
Terrifying.
When she died giving birth to you, I saw that same power in your eyes, even as an infant. I was afraid you'd surpass me, afraid you'd remember her and realize I was never worthy of her love. So you made sure I'd never remember her at all. Aveline felt something break inside her chest, not her heart, but the last fragile chain binding her to this man. You took everything from me. My mother's memory. My wolf. My identity. 21 years of my life. I know. He looked ancient suddenly, defeated. I know. And I. Get out. She turned away, unable to look at him anymore. Get out of the Shadow Realm. Go back to Obsidian Ridge and tell Silas that his wedding to Celine is going to have an unexpected guest. She glanced back over her shoulder, her eyes blazing. Tell him the Omega is coming home. Garrett left without another word, his shoulders bowed like he carried the weight of his sins physically. His escort scrambled to follow, and then they were gone, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the lingering smell of fear. Aveline's wings folded slowly, her form shifting back to human as the adrenaline drained away. She felt Lucian's hand on her shoulder, grounding and warm. Are you all right? He asked quietly.
No.
She leaned back against him, accepting the support even as she hated needing it. But I will be. After the wedding. After they've all paid for what they took. She closed her eyes. After I've burned it all down and rebuilt it into something that can never hurt anyone the way it hurt me. Then let's plan a wedding gift, Lucian murmured against her hair. Something memorable. Something that will remind Silas and Celine that dead girls tell the best stories. Aveline's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I was thinking the same thing. Chapter 8. The Ascension Bloodbath. The Ascension ceremony was held at the peak of the autumn equinox, when the veil between worlds grew thin and bonds formed under the blood moon were said to be unbreakable. Aveline stood in the forest beyond the ceremony grounds, watching hundreds of wolves gather on the sacred plateau where Obsidian Ridge performed its most important rituals. White silk banners snapped in the wind. The High Council sat in their ceremonial robes on the raised dais. And at the center of it all, Silas and Celine stood before the moonstone altar, radiant and triumphant, ready to bind themselves before the assembled packs. You're sure about this? Lucian asked beside her. He'd insisted on coming despite her protests, bringing with him 50 Shadow Realm warriors who now waited at the tree line like living shadows. I've never been more sure of anything. Aveline adjusted the red cloak she wore, the traditional color of challengers, of those who came to dispute a bonding. Beneath it, she wore black leather armor that moved like a second skin, and at her hip hung a blade forged from obsidian and shadow. How do I look? Like vengeance wrapped in ceremony. His smile was approving. They won't know what hit them. The ritual had already begun. Aveline could hear Elder Morna's voice carrying across the plateau, reciting the ancient words of bonding. She waited, patient as death, for the precise moment, the calling of objections, when any wolf could come forward to challenge the union. Should any here present know of any reason these two souls should not be bound, Morna intoned, her voice solemn, let them speak now or— I object. Aveline stepped from the tree line, her voice cutting through the ceremony like a blade. The effect was instantaneous. Hundreds of heads turned. The murmuring started immediately, a wave of confusion and recognition rippling through the crowd. On the dais, Silas went pale as moonlight. Celine's hand flew to her mouth.
No.
No, that's impossible. Hello, sister. Aveline walked forward through the crowd, which parted before her like water before a prow. Surprised to see me? You shouldn't be. Dead girls have a habit of coming back at inconvenient times. Aveline. Her father's voice cracked from where he sat with the council. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the weeks since their confrontation. What are you? I'm here to contest this bonding, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the plateau. Under ancient law, I claim the right of trial by blood. The crowd erupted. Elder Morna raised her hands for silence, her ancient eyes sharp as she studied Aveline. The right of trial by blood can only be claimed by one who is standing. You were declared dead. Aveline Cross. You have no. I have every right. Aveline reached the dais steps, and shadows began to leak from her skin like smoke. I am the eldest daughter of Obsidian Ridge. I am the betrothed who was cast aside and murdered to hide infidelity. And I am a shadow walker, which makes me royalty by blood regardless of pack affiliation. She let her eyes shift to crimson, let them all see what had been hidden for so long. Do you dispute my standing, elder? Morna's breath caught. Around them, the crowd had gone deathly silent. A shadow walker, the elder whispered. The legends were true. Very true. Aveline mounted the steps until she stood level with Silas and Celine. Up close, her sister looked terrified, one hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. Silas had recovered some of his composure, but she could smell his fear, acrid and bitter. This is insane, Silas said, trying for authority and achieving desperation. You can't just what? Interrupt your wedding to the woman you cheated on me with? The sister who helped you push me off a cliff. Aveline pulled a small crystal device from her belt, one of Lucian's more useful inventions, designed to amplify and project sound. I thought the assembled packs might like to hear what really happened at the Forbidden Reach. She activated it. Her own scream filled the plateau, that moment of betrayal and terror as she fell. Then Silas's voice, cold and calculated. We can't have you telling stories, Ava. You understand. And finally, Celine's bright, cruel laughter and her mocking farewell. The silence that followed was deafening. You tried to kill me, Aveline said softly, each word a nail in their coffin. You pushed me off a 300-foot cliff because I was Omega tier and politically inconvenient. Because my father poisoned me for 21 years to hide what I really was, and you wanted the power my name carried without the liability of my existence. It wasn't, Celine started, but Aveline's snarl cut her off. Don't lie. Not here. Not in front of a moon. She turned to address the crowd. I survived that fall. I was rescued by Alpha King Lucian Darkwood, who discovered that I'm not Omega at all. I'm what my father feared most, a shadow walker, poisoned since childhood to suppress my true form. She let the transformation begin, slow, deliberate, giving them all time to witness. Shadows erupted from her skin, wrapping around her body as her wings unfurled. The massive obsidian appendages spread wide, blocking out the moon, casting the entire ceremony into darkness illuminated only by her burning crimson eyes. Wolves throughout the crowd dropped to their knees, some in awe, some in terror. Several members of the High Council actually bowed. I invoke the ancient law, Aveline declared, her voice resonating with power that made the very stones of the plateau tremble. Silas Thornwood attempted to murder his betrothed to hide his crimes. By law, I claim trial by blood, single combat, to the death or surrender. The winner takes Obsidian Ridge. The loser. She smiled, and it was a terrible thing. The loser begs the shadow for mercy. Elder Morna looked to the other council members, but the decision was already made, written in ancient law, undeniable even if they'd wanted to stop it. The challenge is recognized. Silas Thornwood, do you accept? Silas looked trapped, his eyes darting between Aveline's transformed state and the crowd of witnesses. To refuse would mark him as a coward. To accept. I accept, he said finally, his voice barely steady. But when I win, you'll be nothing but another failed Omega who... Aveline moved. One moment she stood on the dais. The next, she was airborne, her wings carrying her up and up until she hung suspended against the blood moon. Then she dove. Silas barely had time to shift. A massive brown wolf, impressive by any standard except the one that mattered. Aveline hit him like a meteor, driving him off the dais and into the ceremonial circle that had been prepared for his bonding. The fight, if it could be called that, was brutal and one-sided. Aveline had spent weeks training with Lucian's best warriors, had unlocked power that had been suppressed for 2 decades, had fed her rage into something refined and deadly. Silas was strong. He'd been groomed for Alpha his entire life, but he'd never faced anything like what she'd become. She used the heights he'd once used to try to kill her, would leap skyward on shadow wings, then dive with claws extended, raking him across the flanks before soaring away from his snapping jaws. Each strike was calculated, each wound deliberate. She was teaching him what it felt like to be helpless, to face something you couldn't possibly defeat. This is for every time you looked at me with pity, she snarled, raking claws across his ribs. For every lie you told me about loving me despite my defect. Another strike, this one drawing blood. For making me believe I was lucky you'd settle for someone like me. Silas tried to mount an offense, lunging with his full weight behind it. She caught him midair, her strength in this form far exceeding his, and slammed him into the ground hard enough to crack stone. And this, she whispered, pinning him with one clawed hand around his throat, is for pushing me off that cliff and watching me fall. She could kill him. The law allowed it. Her wolf demanded it. But as she stared down at him, broken, bleeding, completely at her mercy, she realized something important. Killing him would be quick, easy, forgettable. She wanted him to suffer the way she had. Aveline released his throat and shifted back to human form, standing over his broken wolf with her wings still spread like a dark angel of judgment. I could kill you, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But death is too kind. Instead, I invoke the shame binding. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The shame binding was ancient, rarely used, considered by most to be crueler than execution. You will live, Aveline declared, but you will be bound to serve the new Alpha of Obsidian Ridge. You will never hold authority again. Never lead. Never claim a pack of your own. You'll spend the rest of your life remembering what you were supposed to be and knowing you destroyed it yourself. She turned to Celine, who stood frozen on the dais, her face streaked with tears. As for you, dear sister, you're carrying his child. For that reason alone, I'll show mercy. But you'll leave Obsidian Ridge tonight. Take nothing but what you wear. If I ever see you on these lands again, I'll remember you're not pregnant forever. Elder Mornis stepped forward, her expression grave, but not unsatisfied. Aveline Cross, you have won the trial by blood. By ancient law and Shadow Walker lineage, you are named Alpha of Obsidian Ridge. She paused. All hail the Obsidian Queen. The response was scattered at first, wolves too shocked to process what they'd witnessed. But then Lucian's voice rang out from the tree line, strong and certain. All hail the Obsidian Queen. His warriors took up the cry. Then others. Then more, until the plateau echoed with acclamation for the girl who'd been thrown away and had clawed her way back to take everything. Aveline stood at the center of it all, wings spread against the blood moon, and finally, felt like she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 9. Vengeance from Above. The celebration, if it could be called that, lasted well into the night. But Aveline found no peace in the acclamation, no satisfaction in the wolves who now bowed where they'd once sneered. She stood on the balcony of what had been her father's study, what was now hers, and watched the plateau slowly empty as packs departed to spread word of what they'd witnessed. You're not happy. Lucian's voice came from the doorway. He'd stayed, as she'd known he would, though his warriors had withdrawn to the guest quarters. I should be. Aveline's hands gripped the stone railing. I won. I took everything from them. I became Alpha. But Silas accepted defeat too easily. She turned to face him. Did you see? At the end, when I had him pinned, he looked almost relieved. Lucian's expression darkened. I noticed. He moved to join her at the railing, his presence solid and grounding. And your father left during the ceremony, before you claimed the Alpha title. That stopped her cold. What? He slipped away in the chaos. Took 6 of his most loyal wolves. Lucian's eyes glowed faintly crimson in the darkness. I had him followed. He went to the northern border, to the old temple grounds. The temple grounds, where the Shadow Slayers had once operated before Lucian had crushed their rebellion a decade ago. Where prohibited magic was still whispered about in frightened tones. He's not done, Aveline whispered. The realization settled over her like ice water. He surrendered Obsidian Ridge because he has something else planned. Something worse. Before Lucian could respond, a scream tore through the night. They moved as one, racing through the manor toward the source. Aveline's wings erupted from her shoulders instinctively, carrying her faster through the corridors. The scream had come from the eastern wing, where they'd confined Silas under guard while he healed. She burst through the door to find the guards dead, their throats slit with surgical precision.
And Silas.
He stood in the center of the room, fully healed despite injuries that should have taken weeks to mend. His eyes glowed an unnatural silver, and his skin was covered in symbols that writhed like living things. Dark magic. Blood magic. The kind that required sacrifice to fuel. Thank you, Silas said, his voice layered with something other. For making it so easy. I needed to lose publicly. Needed you to claim the title so the binding ritual would work. What did you do? Aveline demanded, shadows gathering around her fists. What I had to. He smiled, and it was nothing like the charming expression she'd once thought she loved. "Did you really think I'd accept being reduced to nothing? That I'd let some resurrected Omega take everything I'd built?" He raised his hands, and the symbols on his skin blazed brighter. "Your father and I made a deal. The Shadow Slayers preserved one ritual, the Alpha's theft. It requires a false defeat, a bound opponent, and the full moon." Ice flooded Aveline's veins. "No. Oh, yes." Silas's form began to change, but not into a wolf. Into something monstrous, something that shouldn't exist. A hybrid of wolf and shadow, but corrupted, wrong. "I'm going to take your power, little Omega, your Shadow Walker gift. And then I'm going to use it to burn the Shadow Realm to ash, starting with your precious king." He lunged. Aveline met him midair, their collision shattering the window and carrying them out into the night. They grappled as they fell, claws and shadow tearing at each other, before her wings caught air, and she threw him clear. Silas landed on the plateau where she defeated him hours before, and now she understood why. The ceremonial circle was still active, still charged with the moon's power.
He'd planned this.
All of it. "Aveline, don't engage him in the circle." Lucian's shout came from behind her, but it was too late. Silas began chanting in a language that made reality shiver. The silver symbols on his body pulsed in rhythm with his words, and Aveline felt something inside her respond. Her power, trying to answer his call, trying to be ripped away. "No!" She dove toward him, but he was ready. Met her with claws that burned silver and struck with strength that shouldn't have been possible. The blood magic amplified everything: speed, power, endurance. He'd turned himself into a weapon specifically designed to counter her. They fought across the plateau in a savage dance of shadow and silver. Aveline used her wings for mobility, striking from above, but each time she connected, the magical symbols on Silas's skin absorbed some of her power. She could feel herself weakening, feel the Shadow Walker gift being slowly siphoned away. "You can't win," Silas taunted, his voice multiplying with the entities he'd bound to himself. "The ritual is already half complete. Every drop of your blood I spill, every shadow I consume, it all feeds me." He was right. The traditional way wouldn't work. She couldn't overpower something that grew stronger by consuming her strength. So she'd have to be smarter. Aveline let herself fall, tumbling from the sky, like she'd been grievously wounded. Silas took the bait, leaping up to meet her with claws extended for a killing blow. At the last second, she twisted, not away, but toward him, catching his wrists in an iron grip. And she flew. Straight up. Higher and higher, her wings straining with the additional weight as Silas thrashed and snarled. She could feel his magic tearing at her, trying to drain her even as she climbed, but she'd counted on that. Endured it. "What are you doing?" Silas screamed as they rose past the clouds, past the point where the air grew thin. "Something I learned," Aveline gritted out, "from falling." They cleared the cloud layer. Above them, the blood moon hung massive and red. Below was the Forbidden Reach, the same jagged peaks where Silas had pushed her to her death. "You were right about one thing," Aveline said, meeting his terrified eyes. "This ends where it began." She released him. For one perfect moment, Silas hung suspended in empty air, his expression frozen in understanding. Then gravity remembered he existed, and he fell. Aveline watched from above, wings spread against the moon, as he plummeted toward the same rocks that should have killed her. But unlike her, there was no Lucian waiting at the bottom. No rescue. No second chance. The impact echoed across the mountains like judgment. She descended slowly, landing beside the broken form. The silver symbols on Silas's skin were already fading, the stolen magic dissipating without a living host. He was still alive, barely, eyes wide with shock and agony.
How?
He gasped. I survived this fall, Aveline said quietly. But I was worth saving. You? She crouched beside him, her face impassive. You're exactly what you always were. Just another wolf who thought power was something you could steal instead of earn. Please. Blood bubbled from his lips. The ritual, my father will complete it. He'll come for you. Let him come. Aveline stood, looking toward the northern horizon where the old temple smoldered with unnatural light. I'm done running from monsters. It's time they learn to run from me. She left him there on the rocks, alive but broken beyond healing, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought betraying a shadow walker would end well. As she took flight toward the temple where her father waited, Aveline felt something shift inside her. Not the loss of power that Silas had tried to steal, but the shedding of something else. The last remnant of the girl who'd believed she was worthless. Below, Lucian led a contingent of warriors toward the temple as well, prepared for war. But as Aveline soared ahead on wings of shadow, she knew this final confrontation would be hers alone. Her father had spent 21 years trying to kill her. It was time to show him exactly how badly he'd failed. Chapter 10. The Obsidian Queen. The old temple crouched against the mountainside like a wounded beast, its broken columns wreathed in silver mist that moved against the wind. Aveline could feel the wrongness radiating from it, blood magic and desperation, the stench of men trying to grasp power they didn't understand and didn't deserve. She landed in the courtyard without subtlety, her wings stirring up ancient dust and scattering the ritual candles her father had placed. 6 wolves emerged from the shadows, his most loyal, the ones who'd helped poison her, who'd stood silent as she was mocked and diminished. They didn't last long. Aveline moved through them like shadow through light, each strike precise and merciless. She didn't kill them. That would have been too quick, but when she was done, they wouldn't be standing between anyone and their victim ever again. Her father waited in the inner sanctum, standing before an altar stained with old blood and new. He'd changed since their last meeting, grown gaunt, desperate, the silver in his hair now spreading to his skin where he'd carved symbols identical to the one Silas had worn. You killed him, Garrett said without turning. His voice echoed strangely in the chamber. I felt it through the ritual. My alliance, my final play, gone. You sent him to steal my power. Aveline stepped into the chamber, her form still wreathed in shadow. Did you really think I'd let him? I thought you'd be too merciful. Garrett finally turned, and his eyes glowed with that same unnatural silver. Too soft. Too much like your mother, who wasted her gift on compassion and love. He raised his arms, and the symbols on his skin blazed. But I won't make that mistake. The Shadow Slayers left one final ritual, the devouring. I'll consume your power myself, even if it kills me. Better to die as something magnificent than live as the father who failed. The magic surged. Aveline felt it immediately, worse than what Silas had wielded, amplified by her father's intimate knowledge of her, by 21 years of stolen blood and tears. The pull was immense, like hooks in her soul trying to rip the Shadow Walker gift free. She could have fought it, could have met power with power, shadow with shadow, the way he expected. Instead, she did something her father had never anticipated. She stopped resisting. The magic flooded toward her, and she opened herself to it, not in surrender, but in acceptance. Let it touch the core of what she was. Let it see the full scope of the power he'd tried to suppress. And in that moment of connection, her father felt it too. Every drop of poison he'd fed her. Every lie he'd told. Every moment of self-loathing he'd cultivated in a child who'd only wanted his love. 21 years of calculated cruelty reflected back at him through the very magic he'd tried to use as a weapon. Garrett screamed. The ritual shattered. Magic backlashed with catastrophic force, and her father collapsed to his knees as the symbols on his skin burned black. The silver in his eyes died, leaving only a hollow, broken man staring at the daughter he'd destroyed. You felt it, Aveline said quietly, walking toward him. Everything you did to me. Every day. Every moment. She crouched to meet his eyes. How does it feel, father? To finally understand what you created. I was afraid, he whispered, and now there was nothing left but truth. Your mother, she was everything I wasn't. Strong, brilliant, capable of such kindness even with all that power. When she died and left me with you, I saw her in your eyes. Saw everything I could never be. His hands shook. So, I tried to make you small. Tried to convince myself I was protecting the pack, but really I was just protecting herself, Aveline finished, from being eclipsed by your own daughter. He nodded, tears cutting tracks through the ash on his face. I was weak. I am weak. And I destroyed something precious because I couldn't bear to feel inferior to it. For a long moment, Aveline just looked at him. This man who'd shaped her entire existence through his cruelty, who'd stolen her childhood, her identity, nearly her life.
She could kill him now.
Had every right to. The magic that had backfired was already eating him from the inside. He'd be dead in hours regardless. But she'd learned something in her time with Lucian, in her transformation from victim to queen. True power wasn't about domination. It was about choice. I could offer you mercy, Aveline said, standing. Or I could offer you justice. But neither of those is what you actually deserve. She looked toward the temple entrance, where the first rays of dawn were beginning to break. So, instead, I'm going to offer you something worse. A chance to live. Garrett's eyes widened.
What?
The barren lands need wolves. Manual laborers to help the refugees we've displaced with our wars. Aveline's voice was iron. You'll go there. Work alongside the people you once ruled. No authority. No respect. No grand legacy. She leaned closer. Every day, you'll wake up and remember you were Alpha of Obsidian Ridge. And every night, you'll fall asleep knowing you threw it all away because you were too small to love something greater than yourself. That's crueler than death. She smiled without warmth. I know. That's the point. You wanted me broken and small. Now you get to be exactly that, for however many years the blood magic leaves you. She turned to leave, then paused. And father, if you ever come back, if you ever speak my name or my mother's name or claim any connection to what we were, I'll forget I chose mercy. And I'll remind you exactly what a shadow walker does to threats. His sobs followed her out of the temple. Lucian waited in the courtyard, his warriors having dispatched the remaining collaborators. He studied her face, reading what had happened in her expression. It's done, he asked. It's done. Aveline let her wings fold, let the shadows recede until she stood before him as just herself, no longer Omega, no longer broken, but not quite comfortable with what she'd become either. Silas is dead or dying. My father will live with what he did. The conspiracy is ended.
And you?
Lucian stepped closer, and the obsidian bond hummed between them, that connection forged in darkness, tested in fire. What happens to the Obsidian Queen now? Aveline looked back at the temple, then toward Obsidian Ridge in the distance, then finally up at Lucian. Now comes the harder part, building something better than what was broken. making sure no one else gets poisoned by fear and insecurity. She took his hand, feeling the steady pulse of his power meeting hers. The Shadow Realm and Obsidian Ridge have been enemies for generations. But we're proof ancient enemies can change, aren't we? His smile was slow, dangerous, approving. You're proposing an alliance? I'm proposing we end the cycle. Unite the territories. Establish rule based on merit and power, not fear and suppression. She met his burning gaze. I'm proposing we become what legends say we already are, Alpha King and Shadow Queen, balanced bloodlines ruling together. That sounds suspiciously like you're proposing more than just politics. Maybe I am. Aveline felt a real smile tug at her lips for the first time in what felt like forever. You did pull me out of a river and help me remember I was a goddess. Seems like the kind of thing that deserves consideration. Lucian laughed, the sound rich and genuine. Little wolf, you're going to be magnificent. I already am, she corrected. But with you beside me, we'll be unstoppable. 3 months later, under another blood moon, 2 territories became one. The ceremony was nothing like the one Silas had planned. No false promises, no hidden agendas. Just honest vows between 2 wolves who'd found each other in darkness and decided to forge something luminous from it. Aveline stood before the assembled packs wearing a crown of obsidian and shadow, Lucian beside her in equal authority. Below them, Obsidian Ridge and the Shadow Realm had merged into something new, a territory where power was earned, where the strong protected the weak instead of exploiting them, where no child would ever again be poisoned for having potential. Celine watched from the crowd, her child in her arms, her expression unreadable. Aveline met her sister's eyes and saw what she needed to see: understanding, regret, and the beginning of something that might eventually become forgiveness. Not today. Not soon.
But someday.
The Barren Lands sent a representative bearing her father's formal abdication. He was still alive, still working in obscurity, learning what it meant to serve instead of rule. Aveline had the letter burned without reading it. Some stories didn't need epilogues. As the moon rose and the celebration began, Lucian pulled her aside to the same balcony where she'd once stood uncertain and afraid. Any regrets? He asked. Aveline spread her wings one more time, letting them catch the moonlight, feeling the power surge through her veins without poison, without suppression, without shame. Below, wolves from a dozen packs danced and celebrated a future that looked nothing like their past. None, she said, and meant it. They pushed me off a cliff expecting me to die. Instead, I learned to fly. She looked at Lucian, at this impossible man who'd become her partner in every sense. Best revenge I could have asked for. And the title? He asked with amusement. Obsidian Queen? Shadow Walker? Alpha of the United Territories? Which do you prefer? Aveline considered, then smiled, sharp and free and finally her own. Call me what I am, she said. A girl who fell and chose to rise. Everything else is just details. And as the blood moon blessed their reign and the shadows welcomed their queen, Aveline Cross, once broken, once betrayed, now unbreakable, stood at the peak of everything she'd reclaimed and knew with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged. Thank you for watching the story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So, do check it out.